I'm going to unleash the strongest physical damage combo in World of Warcraft. Can the worst damage type in WoW can actually one-shot someone? Physical damage is structurally one of the most disadvantaged damage type. Every target has armor by default, and armor directly reduces incoming physical damage based on the armor rate. That disadvantage becomes even more noticeable against heavily armored classes such as warriors, death knights, and paladins, where physical attacks can lose a significant portion of their damage due to their heavy armor. So today we are playing Survival Hunter. In Midnight, Survival is one of the classes that relies most heavily on physical damage. Wait a minute, what about Arms Warrior or Marksmanship Hunter? Arms Warrior also relies heavily on physical damage, but bleeds like Rend and Deep Wounds allow part of his damage to bypass armor. Marksmanship Hunter is also less purely physical than it first appears. Depending on the hero talent, Dark Ranger adds shadow damage, while Sentinel adds arcane damage, spreading its damage profile across multiple schools. Survival Hunter, on the other hand, has two major burst abilities, Takedown and Boomstick, and both deal direct physical damage. Today we're going to maximize both of them and see if even armor is enough to stop a one-shot. There was one more problem I had to deal with in this experiment. It wasn't just about whether I could generate enough damage to finish someone in a single combo. With patch 12.1, player health was increased by a massive 25%, making one-shotting someone even harder than before. Blizzard has been consistently tuning PvP to avoid fights ending in a single burst and instead make combat last longer. But I'm going to try to go directly against that trend. Before I go into the settings, today's video is sponsored by Overgear. With patch 12.1 bringing a full class rebalance and season 2 resetting PvP ratings, a lot of the build and setups people are used to are going to change again. That's where Overgear's self-play PvP coaching comes in. You stay on your own character while an experienced player reviews your talents, gear, macros, weak auras, and gameplay to find what might be holding you back. Especially with a build this specific, simply copying a standard setup doesn't always give you what you want. Overgear offers coaching for arena and rated PvP, and for the season 2 launch, you can use my promo code for 12% off. It's higher than their normal discount and only available for 1 month. So if you want someone to review your PvP setup for season 2, check out Overgear through the link in the description. For this physical damage one-shot build, the secondary stat I'm going all in on is Mastery. I'm even willing to sacrifice some versatility, which is normally considered essential in PvP, just to push my mastery higher. Survival Hunter's mastery is incredibly efficient because it increases the damage dealt by both you and your pet, while also giving you a built-in damage reduction. There is one catch though, no matter how much mastery you stack, the defensive portion itself doesn't scale any higher, but as long as you stay within 25 yards of your pet, the entire mastery effect is increased by 100%, which means you effectively maintain 6% damage reduction while you are close to your pet. So even if I sacrifice some versatility for more offensive power, I still keep a decent amount of passive defense. To lower my versatility and push mastery even higher, I'm going to use crafted gear for most of my slots. Conquest gear generally comes with a lot of versatility, and some slots don't even offer the mastery combination I'm looking for. With crafted gear, I can put mastery on basically every slot I want and split the secondary stat 50-50 between mastery and versatility. And if you have an engineering profession like me, it gets even better. For the helm, wrist, and boots, you can completely stack a single secondary stat. So in my case, I can dump everything into mastery and push this build even further. Of course, at some point, diminishing returns starts kicking in. That means every additional point of mastery becomes slightly less efficient. But this is not a build about perfect stat efficiency. The whole point of today's experiment is to push physical damage as far as possible, and mastery is still the best secondary stat for doing exactly that. So even if I lose some efficiency along the way, I am willing to accept the diminishing returns and stack as much mastery as possible. For the weapon, I had to choose between dual wielding and using a two-handed weapon. At first, a two-hander sounds tempting because of its higher weapon damage. But Boomstick scales with attack power, not weapon damage, so that higher weapon damage does not directly make Boomstick hit harder. Dual wielding, on the other hand, has a clear advantage through lunge. With a two-handed weapon, lunge gives 3% agility, while dual wielding gives a total of 4% agility. So at the same item level, dual wielding is clearly the better choice for maximizing this combo. If the item level and mastery are the same, it doesn't really matter whether you are using daggers or one-handed axes. Back in Season 1, daggers had an extra advantage because lethal barbs rewarded faster auto attacks with more focus generation. But in 12.1, Blizzard changed lethal barbs specifically to normalize that interaction, so faster weapons no longer have that same advantage. So as long as you're dual wielding and the item level and stats are the same, the actual weapon type doesn't really matter anymore. You are free to use whichever one-handed weapon with mastery. Now here's something important. I actually started working on this video near the end of patch 12.07, and before I could even finish it, patch 12.1 arrived. Survival Hunter did receive some talent changes in the new patch. Fortunately, the talents that matter most for this experiment, the ones that directly empower takedown and boomstick, didn't change very much. First, use kill command to build up tip of the spear. Each stack increases the direct damage of your next ability by 20%. So ideally, I want enough stacks ready to empower both takedown and boomstick. Next, apply Wildfire Bomb to activate Outland Venom. Each damage over type effect on the target increases the critical strike damage they take from me by 4%, giving our burst another multiplier whenever takedown or boomstick crits. And Wildfire Bomb isn't the only way to activate it. The pack leader Bear applies his own bleed effect, which can give us another damage over time effect for Outland Venom. And there's one more, Stampede. Stampede also applies periodic damage, giving us yet another way to increase the value of Outland Venom during our burst. Then we stack every direct modifier we can find. Shell Shock increases boomstick's damage by 40% against a single target. Bonding pushes our mastery even further. Vulnerability increases boomstick's critical strike damage by 20%. Explosive Expert gives boomstick another 10% damage increase. And Flanked increases takedown's damage by a massive 50%. Takedown is a coordinated attack between you and your pet, so I picked Killer Companion, which increases all pet damage by 20%, and Strike as One adds another 30% increase to all damage dealt by your pet. Those pet modifiers don't increase the entire takedown hit, but they do make the pet portion of takedown significantly stronger. There's one more important mechanic in Pet Leader. Every 30 seconds in combat, your next kill command summons one of three beasts in a fixed rotation, a wyvern, boar, or bear. For this build, the bear doesn't really help us, because it mainly deals its own bleed damage. But either wyvern or the boar can directly improve the combo we're trying to maximize. The wyvern increases the damage dealt by both you and your pet by 10%, which is perfect for takedown, since both hunter and the pet attack together. The boar, on the other hand, activates Hawk Strider. Each time the boar deals damage, it increases the damage of your next boomstick, stacking up to 28%. So depending on which beast coming next, we can either make takedown hit harder with the wyvern, or set up an even stronger boomstick with the boar. So if we put everything together, the ideal setup looks like this. First, apply Hunter's Mark to increase the target's damage taken from me by 3%. Then, start combat as early as possible and keep using Kill Command and Raptor Strike to cycle Howl of the Pack Leader as quickly as possible. Ideally, we want either the wyvern or the boar. Then, throw Wildfire Bomb to apply damage over time effect to the target and activate Outland Venom. Once everything is ready, we go into the burst. Takedown, followed immediately by Kill Command to trigger Stampede, and then finish with the fully empowered boomstick. That's the ideal sequence. Set up every modifier we can, then unload the entire physical damage combo in one short burst window. The tricky part is boomstick's 25-yard range. You don't need to be standing face to face with your target, but you also can't let them get too far away. In most situations, this isn't going to be a huge problem because takedown puts you right on top of the target anyway. But if you need a little more control, you can use Intimidation to stun them before firing Boomstick. Another option, if you have Tailoring, is to use one of the Profession's dead items to root the target in place for about 3 seconds. These nests can also be used in Battlegrounds, which makes them surprisingly useful for setting up a clean Boomstick hit. and their cooldown is only a minute, and they do not share cooldowns with any other items. Now, all that's left is to take this build into an actual battleground. In Arena, this combo is actually harder to set up than you might expect. There are a lot of classes with pets and summon units, and players tend to stay relatively close together, so finding a clean isolated target isn't always easy. Battlegrounds, on the other hand, are much more unpredictable. The maps are much larger, players are constantly moving between objectives, and you can often find someone completely alone and separated from their team. And that's exactly the kind of target we're looking for. I think because physical damage is naturally reduced by armor, Blizzard actually scaled the damage a bit higher than what it should be, and you can really feel that against low armor targets like casters. Without some kind of defensive cooldown already active, they can get absolutely melted within seconds by this combo. Warlocks can survive a little longer because they have some incredibly strong defensive cooldowns, but against a much squishier caster like a mage, it's a completely different story. If they don't kite, escape, or use a defensive immediately, they are pretty much dead. And the real problem is heavy armor classes, and there's no question that armor makes a huge difference. That's exactly what the system is designed to do. And indeed, physical damage is still one of the least forgiving damage types in WoW. For a damage dealer that relies heavily on physical damage, a heavily armored target can feel like a fortress. But even a fortress can be broken if you hit it with enough concentrated force. And Survival Hunter has exactly that kind of power. We don't have shadow magic, we can't throw fireballs. What we do have is gunpowder, steel, and the fangs of a wild beast, all coming together to tear through the enemy with overwhelming physical force. If any spec deserves to test the absolute limit of physical damage, it's Survival Hunter. Maybe physical damage can't truly one-shot, but Survival Hunter can get dangerously close.